yourself. And I think the other thing is I can't see you, but you can see me. And so just bear with my facial expressions every now and then as I'm trying to navigate the technology and everything else that's going on. And those of you who know me from prior presentations know that I hate technology. So this is my move into becoming more comfortable and changing how I see technology and its use in the world. So again, it's about worldview. And when I look at things, that's kind of how I see it. So I'll greet you in the tradition that I always do, which is that piece, if my little clicker will actually let me do what I was saying I was going to do, which I find interesting because now everything seems to be frozen. So give me just a moment while I try this. Becky, you may have to help me because I seem to be locked in and can't even escape.
Oh, weird.
To get back to things.
Huh.
I'm not enjoying this at all because it makes my life.
So we had it working
this
great.
This is why I hate technology, right?
Really. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and start talking and I will come over to you. Oh, I see your cursor, so maybe that helps. Your cursor's moving.
Well, and I thought it would, and nothing's helping here that allows me to actually move my, oh, there we go.
There we go.
I don't know what you took off, but something disappeared up in my upper left-hand corner.
Oh, good.
So whatever that was, thank you. So I'll greet you in the tradition that I try to start most of the things that I do, which is with a greeting that just simply says Sawubona. And most people look at that and they go, huh, I wonder what that really means. Well, this is a Zulu greeting. And it really means I see you. And is an invitation to a really deep witnessing and presence. It forms an agreement, really, to affirm and investigate the mutual potential that we all have. It's that thing that takes us to the deepest level, and it invites you to see me in a different way and me to see you in a different way. When we first started this, you were looking at Becky and I, and I'm pretty sure that you began to form an impression of who each of us were. We do that pretty much all the time. When I'm driving down the street, I look out my windshield, I see somebody standing there, and in my head I create a story about who that person is, what they do, why they're standing there, why they're standing the way they are. All types of things start to flash through my head. This is not unusual. It is just simply the way that things are with us. It's how we act and interact in everything that we do. And so the questions that I pose to you are these. Who did you think I was when you first saw me? What were your first impressions? Because usually when I'm doing things, folks expect someone who is wearing a suit and tie. And if you've ever been to a presentation of mine, you've heard me talk about the fact that I started out in the corporate world. My first job was with the Dow Chemical Company, and I spent many years wearing a suit and tie. And I've since come to realize that that's not really who I am. And so I wanted you to get your impression, to think in your head, who do you think I am? And is my appearance professional or unprofessional? These are not questions I'm looking for you to answer, just merely questions that I'm throwing out for your consideration. So as we go through this, the first thing I would like to do is to invite you to look at a series of images. And I want you to think about your thoughts as you look at them. I will tell you that as innocuous as the title of this is about stories and restorying, there are some images and things in this presentation that will cause one to take pause. And if that does that for you, please know that I'm doing it in the frame of learning. So there is a series of about 7 slides here that I just want you to take a look at. So I'm going to flash them up, and I'll come back to them later on in the presentation. Just think about the thoughts and the reactions to what you're seeing. And just so you know, I'm actually not clicking, it's moving on its own. So just to give you an idea.
So Dave, does that mean you're concerned and you'd like me to come look at it, or are you all good?
No, I'm good, Becky. It just moved on its own. In fact, I did this presentation 2 days ago with a group of physicians and nurses here at the Institute on Clinical Systems Improvement. And it did the same thing, so I'm wondering where the glitch is. I don't think it's technological. I don't think it has to do with webinar. I think it has to do probably with the presentation itself. And so I think it may be just timed that way.
Got it. Thank you.
So in our own reality, when we see things like the images that I just showed you, we have to think of it this way. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. So it's not about what's really true about what I'm looking at, but how do I really see that? Words like fairness, change, interference, freedom, they trigger different reactions based on how you see the world, and yet we rarely think about why we react to things the way we do. It's always easier to encourage action based on an existing worldview than it is to change that view. So that brings us to the question of really, what is a worldview? Worldview is nothing more than the lens and the concept of the way you see the world. So what are the lenses that frame how you do that? The real question is, how did you get yours? This is a lifelong journey for many of us. And at its simplest level, it's through your life experiences, those experiences that you have with your parents at school or your spiritual beliefs, all different types of things. Even movies, TV, and in today's age, the internet. We often say that we're not born with a worldview, but we are born into a worldview. And so all of those things begin to have an impact on everything that we say and do. These are local constructs of behavioral norms, and they play a big role in the construction of how we see the world. Another way of looking at this, we have a systems thinking tool that we use called the ladder of inference. And the ladder of inference, as it says there, is our mental models are the assumptions and beliefs that arise from our everyday experience and our cultural context. And so culture plays a lot in this. And those of you that are caregivers or have been a caregiver or were being cared for by someone, we all walk down this road. We know that babies are basically born with everything at the very beginning. They do basically 4 things. They eat, sleep, poop, and they cry. Now there are some variations to that, but when you think about it, that's pretty much what they do. Everything from that day forward, from the day that they are born, begins to form their worldview. And so when you think about that, think about the amount of data that that child is taking in, that we as adults, when we were children and still do, take in. Now, they talk about observable data and experiences. We also, that word observable, we always want to go back to seeing, but we have more senses than just sight. For instance, the sense of smell. My wife used to own a small manufacturing company, a soap company, and we made all natural bath and body products, and one of our best sellers was patchouli. And if any of you are from the 60s, and you may remember what patchouli oil was used for specifically. For those of you who may be younger, it was used to cover up the smell of pot. And so every time I smell the scent of patchouli that someone is wearing, you can imagine where my head goes in the story that I start to create. In fact, I just did it today. having breakfast at a breakfast meeting and someone was wearing patchouli that walked past, and my instant response when I turned my head was, oh, they're covering something up. Not necessarily, but that was how fast my worldview came into this. So you've got all of this data. But there's so much data coming in that we have to select the data that we really want to use from all of the data that's coming in. Some of it is just extraneous. And so as we begin to pare down the amount of data that we bring in, we also then have to add meanings, both cultural and personal, to what that data means. After we add meanings to it, we make some assumptions based on those meanings. Now, I know that in the field that you work in, and I do a lot of work around trauma, and so I know when I'm training new foster parents and we start to talk about their assumptions about who and why this child is in placement, there are some interesting assumptions that get made. On the other side of that, the birth parents make some very interesting assumptions about the social workers and why they're doing what they're doing. And so we have to take all of those things into account and just begin to understand that that's each of us doing what we do naturally. After we make those assumptions, we draw conclusions. We adopt a set of beliefs about how the world is. And then we take our actions based on those beliefs. So understand that this is nothing more than a very simple means of looking at how did I build my core belief structure? What are the things that cause me to do that? As we're doing that, one thing we need to keep track of is that my beliefs shape the data I select in the future. So if I start to believe that birth parents, that they abuse their children because they just don't know how to parent, then I begin to shape my belief and the data that I take in. And in fact, I'll select data that actually proves what my beliefs are. So when we think about our ability to learn and work together with others, and especially those who are different from us, we're limited by our feelings that, first of all, our beliefs are the truth. And we believe that because we've passed everything that we've done through our own system. We begin to believe that all of these things, even though we have narrowed the amount of data that we actually become tunnel vision in this. And you notice that this ladder starts to lean in a little bit. That's the depiction that our beliefs are the truth, not yours, that mine are the truth. The other thing I believe is that the truth is very obvious, and I know because it's mine. I have filtered it, and I have the data to prove that my truth is obvious, and that my beliefs are based on the real data, and that yours are not. I often hear people talk about data, and we have this data that shows this, and so everybody runs to this evidence-based model. And you'll often find folks will look at that evidence-based model and immediately tell you that it won't work. And rightfully so, because in their mind, they've got other data. And I understand the importance of research and the value of data, but I also know that every good research hypothesis starts with a certain amount of bias and assumption built in. Questions are not neutral. They always have a built-in bias. And so when people look at you and say, whose evidence? They're trying to tell you that they have evidence that would refute what you're talking about. And when you're out in communities doing this work, and especially in highly traumatized communities, you may hear this often. And people may not want to buy into some of the evidence-based models that are there because they know in their own heart that this isn't going to work. There's also this piece that says that the data that I select is the real data. You can select as much data as you want, but mine is the only real data, and that's because I have run it through my own core value structure. It really is just a framework for reflecting on how we create mental models. If you are interested in diving deeper into this, down in the right-hand corner is where you'll find even more. This is from the 5th Discipline Field book by Peter Senge and a number of other people. They are from the Presencing Institute in Seattle, and they do an awful lot of work there around this specific topic. But let's shift a little bit.
Hey,
let's
Dave.
Start talking. Yeah.
This is Becky. I just wanted to jump in for a quick second because I realized that I have a thought that some people, as you were talking about these resources where people could look at it, I could imagine people out there thinking and wondering, how can I get a copy of this handout? So I thought I would try to answer that question. And just, I realized I forgot to mention it at the beginning. If you click on the handouts button in the GoToWebinar panel, you can download the slides themselves. And the other thing I thought is me jumping in and asking that question might also encourage people, again, if they have questions at any time, to raise your hand or pop them in. Because as you said to me when we were preparing for this webinar, if you ask for your questions when they come up, then it's right, sort of connected to what you're talking about in the moment. So I just sort of wanted to also invite any questions that people may be thinking of right now to go ahead and type them in the question box or raise your hand, and we will make sure they get into the conversation early on.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, being on this end and doing all the talking and not hearing another voice, I'm a highly traumatized individual. I need interaction. So for those of you who are willing to have mercy on me out there, please, if you can engage with me in more of a dialogue. I have at least 3 hours worth of material sitting in front of me, and I can't get through it in an hour and a half. I would prefer not to, simply because I want to make sure I'm addressing the things that you truly want to know about. This idea of worldview is one that has come up in the recent past. I noticed that there's even a section in the Minneapolis paper called Worldview, which never used to be. And so there is an interest to understanding how this works. It comes into play in everything that we do in life. I find it most in my work because I'm constantly working with people to try to have those dialogues that we keep saying we want to have around multiple issues. But the one that comes to mind just today, because I was reading about St. Olaf College again today, is this issue of race and racism, and how do we actually have those conversations. And yes, I can feel you cringing on the other end already. No, we're not going to go down that road, but know that this conversation of worldview is a way to move into that space that doesn't make people uncomfortable. Because when you start talking about how we create our core value structures, it leads us naturally into that conversation, and we don't even have to talk about it. We just talk about it through this frame. So I am welcoming questions, please. But Becky, if there is nothing, and I take your silence to say that there are no questions.
I haven't seen any, so I don't know how we're gonna get them to pipe up, but just, well, there aren't any yet.
People become really quiet, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk some about what's the brain science behind all of these things. Our worldviews and our personal identities are really wrapped up in each other. Who we are and how we see others matters to us. Psychological research tells us that when our identities, our worldviews are challenged, we don't become curious and ask, I wonder why I see things differently. Usually what we do is we respond as if our very life or our mortality is being threatened. And we we tend to do some really sometimes irrational things. If you think about, and a lot of you know this, you think about how the brain is divided up into that thinking brain, emotional brain, and the action brain. You start to think about, okay, so the brain sets up all of this pieces around abstract thought. It allows us to create and innovate and to imagine. When you think about the emotional brain, it's all about how we're feeling and that we are connected to other people in the world around us. And that's one of those things that really becomes really significant when you stop to think about what the impact of challenging someone's core value structure or worldview is like. And so we talk a lot about amygdala hijack. And so what happens is that, so the amygdala is there basically to keep us alive, right? Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, that other one, where you try to become so small in a room that no one can see you, even though none of us can hide. It's that piece that if the saber-toothed tiger jumped out at you today, your body would say, run. And the amygdala, if you think about how fast this thing works, 1/1000th of a second is what it takes for the amygdala to tell us to run away, that there is danger, that we're going to die if we don't get away from that saber-toothed tiger, right? When your worldview is challenged, it's interesting, the result that we get is identical. The amygdala takes over when our worldview gets challenged. And you know that when the amygdala takes over, that the thinking part of our brain, the more advanced part, shuts down. And we go back to responding in the ways that we know around fight, flight, or freeze. And so we don't ask that question about, I wonder what's really going on here. We get into self-defense mode, and we want to take the time and really tell that person why what they're trying to tell me is wrong. Now, I talked about worldviews, and I want to just give you a simpler way of thinking about this. And I'm hoping you can see this object I'm holding up. Can they see that, Becky?
They can. And actually, Dave, I have a question that just came in. So do you want to do the question before the object? Or the object before the question?
Yeah, we'll do the question first. We'll do the question first.
So Aloyda is asking, will we have access to this webinar for later replay? Oh, sorry, I should have read it before I interrupted you, but others will want to know. Unfortunately, I need to leave early and won't be able to stay to the end. So I guess that's a Becky question. I just got excited seeing the question. So yeah, webinar, we are recording the webinar and it will be available on our website. I will type in the web address in the response to questions so everybody can see it. All right, thank you so much for the question.
Yep. Hey, any question's a good question.
Yes.
So here's an object. Now, I'm sure that all of you have a name for this object. And I will just tell you that in my normal role, I would tell you that this was a butter knife. But have you ever used this thing for anything else? What would happen if I told you it was actually my screwdriver? Because I have used knives as screwdrivers before, and I'm sure some of you may have done that. And so it becomes that simple. You see this one way. Someone else sees it differently. So when you think about worldviews, understand that each one of us has worldviews. We don't just have one. That there is a multiplicity of worldviews that we're looking at. And that when you have someone, those of you who work with people who are highly traumatized, or you have been traumatized yourself, stop and think about the implications of how much work have you done yourself to deal with your own issues, or how much has that other person done, especially if the amygdala has been on high alert for a very long time. I know that my amygdala is constantly activated. So when I have that hyperarousal which sits with me a lot. I have to be very cognizant about how I'm responding to people with the things that they say and do. I could see everything as an attack, and I would attack back. Or if I have done some of the work, I may start to ask myself a question about why am I feeling the way that I am? Because our tendency is to want to blame other people, and so we fear when people attack us. It becomes that defensive fear to a great extent. It's born of a story we tell ourselves. And so I'm choosing to tell myself a different story. And for me, it makes things work a lot better. So I'd like for you to take just a few minutes here. I want you to think about a recent time when you may have experienced an amygdala hijack. I want you to think of the situation. How did you respond? How could you have handled things differently? Can you tell me how your body felt? Our bodies talk to us. It tells us our amygdala has been hijacked. I know that when I know what I feel like when that's happened. My face doesn't get flushed. I start to sweat. I'm really hyperactive in the things that I do, and I find myself literally backing into a corner so that I can protect myself. So these are things that I know about myself. So I know what's happening. But I want you to think about that for a couple of minutes, about what happened to you when your amygdala was hijacked or when you felt that stress. And if you struggle with that, think about the time when you were in a room and someone said or did something that you thought you should have responded to and didn't. How did you feel? What was happening? So now that you've had a little while to think about that, let's explore a few other factors regarding brain science and worldviews and human behaviors. A lot of the current research on brain science and human behavior is supported by organizations interested in product advertising and political campaigns. And if you remember the last election, there were some very polarizing things that happened as a result of that election. I find often in the work that I do that I have family members who can't talk to one another. People who have been friends for an exceptionally long time, who it's not just that they can't talk to one another, they don't even want to see each other anymore. And so the question becomes, what happens when we have our way of seeing the world challenged? So let's talk a little bit, or think a little bit about this thing called motivated reasoning.
Dave?
Yep.
There is another question that's come in, and I suspect I'll share it with you, and you can decide when and how to weave the answer in. Can you please briefly share your journey to address your trauma and how you moved from everything is an attack and your then self-defense mechanism of perhaps step back?
Yeah. My journey is, I just call it interesting. For about 60 years, and that gives you some reference to about how old I am. For about 60 years, I spent my life trying to tell people about the things that were happening in my life. And I had been constantly told from from the time I was a child that what I was trying to tell people could not possibly be true. That people were not that disingenuous, if you will, that they did not mean me harm, that it could not possibly be that I must be crazy to think that those things. And I actually began to think that I was crazy. In fact, I had been told at one point that I couldn't write. And my boss had told me that enough. Now you're talking about a college-educated person who worked for major corporate Fortune 500 company, who has written poetry, who has written all different types of things. But I've been told that I can't write. And what they were talking about was that I did not write business language. And they're probably correct, because what I have come to understand is that I'm not a story writer. I am a storyteller. And there's a big difference. And that plays into how people see the world. In the business world, in the corporate world, everything has to be conducted black and white. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And the dominant society wants that documentation. It doesn't mean that the stories that I tell aren't the same documentation. Now when I tell a story, I simply use a program called Dragon that writes down everything that I say. And so I'm in the midst of storytelling, but I have to figure out how do I get that similar message across to other people. I had been struggling. In fact, I left 2 positions because my core value structure and what they wanted me to do did not line up. And before I left the second one, I had the opportunity to go to a conference in San Diego. At that conference, and know that when I go to conferences, because being African American male in this country, most people are wary. I'll just use wary as the word when I am around. And so I have learned that the best way for me to participate in conferences, because I'm very gregarious, I love talking to people, I could sit in one position and talk to multiple people and build relationships. And so I did that. For me, it was not about going into a session. One day I found myself with no one to talk to. And so I decided, let's go see what's going on in the conference. I don't know how I selected. I don't even know that I did select the session that I walked into. I think it may have selected me. But at the front of the room was this white guy with solid white hair that was perfectly combed, who was talking about trauma. Now, this guy was in a 3-piece suit. He was dressed to kill. There was nothing out of place. And he was standing there talking, and I'm kind of looking around, looking at, okay, who's my next victim that I can talk to? And something he said reached into my brain and said, wake up, he's talking about you. And as I began to listen to what he was saying, everything he talked about was my life. He described Dave Ellis to a T. Everything that happened in my life was what he was talking about, but he never pointed at me. He never said, this is Dave Ellis's life. This is my subject. And so I kept looking around the room to see if someone was looking at me, because it felt like he described me that well. And no one was looking at me. In fact, everyone was locked on him. And it was that point at which I began to realize that I wasn't crazy. that in fact, there was nothing wrong with me, that there are a lot of things that happened to me in my lifetime, but there was nothing wrong with me, that I had simply adapted based on the experiences that I had in my lifetime. And I moved from that frame of something being wrong with me to what happened to me. The guilt that I had always felt, the shame and blame that I had always carried with me, disappeared. It was that point at which I could begin to actually do my own work. Because I've been trying to help other people for a long time. And my worldview was, I can do this work. I'm really good at what I do. I can do this work. And yet I found myself spinning. I was never really having the effect that I wanted to have. And it wasn't until I accepted the fact that my worldview of being able to help other people, regardless of how damaged I had been in my own processes, was false. No one could have given me enough data to believe that in fact, I had to hear this in a way that would allow me to hear it, that I wouldn't fight back. Once I heard it, I was much more amenable to getting the help that I needed to help me dig deeper, to find out what was happening in my own trauma world and what the implications were. Am I fully healed? No, that's a long time from now. Healing is a journey, but I have to do my own stuff first. And if I know I am a fixer, I want to help people, and I have to let go of that. I have to have a worldview that says that there's nothing wrong with these folks, that they're not broken, that they're not failed attempts at being who I am, that in fact they are perfect who they are, and that my role is to do my own work. And as I do more of my work, I become in a better position to help them do their work. And as we do our work together, we can grow to a community where we can actually begin to heal as a community and support each other, and eventually move to a space where we are preventing the trauma levels that we currently inflict. But that requires our being able to see the world as it is, not as we are. That requires us to begin to think differently. And it moves us, and so I'm back, and I hope I answered your question. And so any of the rest of you, please know that I will share who I am. You notice I didn't introduce myself at the very beginning. I tend to do that at the end. I asked you those questions at the beginning for a reason. Who did you think I was? What did you expect? Because I wanted to do this a little bit differently. Hell, I'm out here on using technology to have a conversation with you, which the last time I did one of these, I felt so uncomfortable that 3/4 of the way through, I made them shut it down because I couldn't go any further. And now here I sit, feeling like I am absolutely okay with this. I can do this, and I am absolutely okay with it. If I didn't answer your question, make me go deeper. Those of you who want to know more, ask your questions. But one of the things that we talk about, this exploration, that really it could be viewed as foundational for what we're going to discuss here, is this thing around motivated reasoning. It's about a behavior where once we have made a decision, it doesn't matter. We have an unconscious tendency to process information in a way that supports and validates every decision that we've got. And so the constant piece that no matter what the data is, I only select the data that validates my decisions, my way of thinking, my truth. And that there's this piece called confirmation bias, where we look for information specifically to support our worldviews and perspectives, our opinions and beliefs. The more we see and experience and hear something, the more we believe it, even if it's not true.
Dave?
Yes.
This is Becky. I just want to let you know that Melissa typed in, I think she must have done it right at the moment that you were talking about feeling comfortable with technology and having not felt comfortable with it previously. She typed, "You're doing great," with about 12 exclamation points.
Thank you. As I said before, I am a trauma baby, and I need those types of things that tell me that I am doing well. We don't tell people enough how well they actually do what they do, or how well they're doing in the performance of the roles that they play in all of this. And believe it or not, we need to hear that. People need to hear that, hey, you know what? I appreciate that. I told someone the other day, I'm on my way out to New Jersey to work with their teachers union out there. They have 200,000 members. I've got a keynote to about 500 of them on a Friday evening. And the lady that I'm working with, she says, well, you know, I want to do this thing called open space technology the next day. So I want to have a conference where we don't outline what's going to happen, that the participants do. And I said, okay, I've got a structure for you for that. And she says, but I don't know anything about it. I'm really nervous. I said, look, I'm going to tell you what I tell all of my bosses. I only have one job, and that really is to make you look like you walk on water. And we were talking on the phone, but she went, and she said, I've never heard anybody tell me so succinctly that they're looking out for my best intentions. How do we, as Maya Angelou says, how do we become a rainbow in someone else's clouds?
So Dave, I have another rainbow for your cloud.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I have another rainbow for your cloud, actually, from the comment section.
Go for it.
So Loida says, I was meant to attend this webinar. I'm sad that I have to leave, but I'm very appreciative that you'll make it available for viewing at another time. I see the handout includes Dave's contact information. I plan to reach out to him. Please thank Dave for his presentation, and I look forward to viewing the remainder later. Gracias.
De nada. De nada. Or maybe it's por nada. We'll see. Please do. Thank you very much for that. You know, when people, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, right? So there's multiple levels of trauma and stress, right? So there's this positive stress that we all deal with. And that's what I've been having, and I have it every time I have to present. People refer to it as butterflies. And I carry butterflies with me all the time because I feel like I'm constantly presenting and I have to be constantly on. Unfortunately, that is a part and parcel of what it means to be constantly code switching in a world that I can't be who I am all the time. Like right now, I am in my more professional mode, but I will tell you, what you see here is who I am. I just had a conversation with some folks that want me to come into Land O'Lakes. And if you know about Land O'Lakes, they are on par with General Mills as far as money is concerned. They're this massive corporation. And the lady I was talking to, she says, do you think you could wear slacks and tie? And I said, yeah, I could, but if that's what you're looking for, you've got the wrong person. And she looked at me and she says, no, you're exactly who we want to do this. I said, then why don't you want me to be who I am? And she looked at me, and I think it began to sink. And I told her, I said, you know, if you want me to be me, if you want a suit, hire a suit. If you want me to be me and to do what I do, then allow me to do that in the full genuineness of who I am. When I got hired, 99% of my employers looked at me and said, I want you to come and do this job, make it yours. I want you to bring your full self into this job. And yet when I do it, that can create some stress within a workplace. But you know what? Stress isn't a bad thing. It's naturally occurring. Stress isn't bad until it becomes distress. It's like disease. there's not a problem until it becomes dis-ease, right? And so think about the words that we actually use, because we live in the direction of our language, positive or negative. And that comes into this whole world of worldviews, confirmation bias. You know, when you start thinking about confirmation bias, and you think about how fast we form these opinions and how we unconsciously filter out things that don't support what we believe to be true. And so all of these things start to play into it. And here's one of my favorite ones. Once we've made a decision, not only are we committed to it, but we have difficulty. We really have difficulty holding a conflicting view. We become extremely uncomfortable when asked to hold that conflicting view. So I have a way of saying something and you ask me to see something different, I have a real hard time with that. And that's where cognitive difference comes in. And this is that piece around having dis-ease with what's going on. Yeah, I know in the medical profession you like to talk about disease, but it really is about dis-ease. Yeah, I like this one. As human beings, we are born with a built-in bias that we are not biased. This makes us believe our own view is reasonable, even if it isn't. This is a little piece called naive realism. We don't want to believe that we're biased, and therefore we don't believe that. We believe that our view is reasonable. You know, people ask me all the time about our president, our current president, and they want my reaction. And I tell them, well, you know, there's nothing that can be done to me that hasn't been done already. And so I've kind of let go of all of that. And that I have to understand that while I may not agree with the way they see the world, they do have a worldview. Now, I may not like it, but I have to at least understand that they have one. And that's where we get hung up, is that I think sometimes we believe that we have to actually change people's worldviews. And I told you what happens when we try to do that. As soon as we start that conversation where my right makes yours wrong, we've got a fight on our hands. And there is absolutely no way of rectifying that, because once that fight starts, I will if I can't win, I will disengage with you. And I'll walk away from the conversation and leave you standing there. My worldview constantly tells me that I have to ask the question, help me understand how you got there. What was the data that you took in that convinced you of whatever it is that they believe? What has convinced you that methane isn't a greenhouse, isn't an environmental issue around the greenhouse effect? And at that point, they'll start to tell me. Then it's not about refuting what they say. I mean, giving them more data doesn't help. What does help is that I'm finally hearing their story. Now we're back to the title, story and restorying. And so it's about, how can I get you to share your story with me? I was in Rochester a number of years ago, if you remember the Trayvon Martin shooting. We did a dialogue here in St. Paul at the Wilder Foundation, and the same one in Rochester, entitled, "What Have We Learned from the George Zimmerman Verdict?" And immediately here in the metropolitan area, we got phone calls saying that folks believed we were trying to take their guns away, and that the Second Amendment rights folks wanted to be a part of the dialogue. And my response was, absolutely, please come. Unfortunately, the organization who was hosting us did not, they wanted more police protection, which they got, and some folks did not show up as I had hoped that they would have. In Rochester is a little bit different situation, kind of the same context, the same dialogue, and as we were getting ready to start, about 10 people from the Tea Party came in, and they self-expressed that that's where they were from, and proceeded to tell me that they were concerned because the people there would probably not like what they had to say, and they wouldn't be listened to. And my statement to them was, you know, it's an open dialogue. The only thing that I ask is that you keep an open mind and that you listen to hear and not respond. And the second thing I want you to do is, there's about 10 of you, there are 15 tables, please spread yourself around. Don't just sit in one place. At the end of the conversation, it was very interesting because people came up to me, those very same people, and said, how did you do that? And I looked at them and said, do what? I said, if anything happened, it's because you guys did something. He says, we found out that we agree. Both of us want our education systems to work. Both of us want smaller government. You know, all of us, you know, we all want this, we all want that, and we agree. And he says, I didn't think we would ever agree on anything. He says, we may not agree on how to get there, but we agree on it at the foundational level. If you can get people to talk about things and get to that point, you can always figure out how to cross the other barriers, but at least you've started talking. Because once I tell you my story and you've told me your story, I can't look at you in the same way anymore. I have to see you as that thing on the screen about being human. You can no longer be just the other. And we do a really good job of others in this country and othering, but it's about being human. How do we make it human? A lady this morning talked to me a long time about the Irish and how she as a white female, Irish, felt all of this shame because she didn't realize that at one point in time the Irish were on the bottom in this country. And I tried to tell her, in this country, everyone's been on the bottom at some given point in time. It's not just about black and white or red or yellow or brown. At some point, all of us have been on the bottom. The question is, how do we do this in a way that we don't have to have people on the bottom, and that we can have the dialogues that we believe we need to have? So I'm talking about this thing called worldview, right? And I'm going to pick this up a little bit because I can already see that I've got about 25 minutes left, and I want to leave even more, a little bit of time at the end in case someone pops in with a question, right? So there are 6 dimensions. The first one being reality. So if you think about this, I told you that we form our beliefs and our opinions, and then we lead to some action, right? And so if I really explain this well, if I tell you that my worldview, the way that I am in the world, says that I'm an environmentalist, some of the things that you might tell me that I would do, the actions I would take is that, and I'll just give you the one that always comes up, I would drive a Prius. If you know me, you know that I weigh 370 some odd pounds, so I probably aren't kind of getting that Prius. Although a friend of mine has one, I have found out that I can get in it, I just don't function well in it. But I would be driving some fuel economy car, that I would be using electronics for this presentation and not print it out and have everybody have that thing, that I'd be raising, that I'd be gardening, that I'd be composting. If I did all of those things, my worldview, I would tell you that I'm an environmentalist by the actions that I'm taking. Same thing, that my actions will tell you what my worldview is. The problem comes in when I look at you and I tell you I'm an environmentalist, but my actions, I drive a full-size GMC pickup truck. I don't compost. I waste. I constantly am printing. All those things that would be negative. Now what you know is I am not authentic in what I'm saying, because what I'm saying and my actions don't line up, and people are very good at reading you when you're being inauthentic. As much as we think we can hide it, the people we work with, they do this on a daily basis because they have to know who's really being truthful with them. So in our workings around worldview, beginning to understand the implications of how our worldviews, how we see the clients that we work with, how they see us, and can we allow those things to live in the spaces together becomes the real question. The second piece is history. So what's my reality? I live in North Minneapolis. I have for the last 40 years, and I absolutely love it there. What's my history? I'm from a very small farming community. Why does that matter? Because it tells you the context for how my world was. When I tell you that my father was born in 1896, my father was born in 1896, that tells you the history. When people ask me what group do I belong to, lots of folks would say African American. I use two words, enslaved American, because the culture that I come from, my African roots were ripped away. But my relatives were enslaved in this country. They were not slaves. That would be putting the onus on the person. They were enslaved. That puts the onus on the people who were actually doing the behavior. And I'm in America. Now, I did spend time going back to find out about my history. And what I found out was that I come from a little basin between Zimbabwe and Tanzania. And I have gone there. And it was the first time in my life that I felt like, I think, and this is a generalization, how white people must feel in this country. It was a place where everybody looked like me. And so I didn't have to think about people who looked different. All of the decisions were made by people like me. So I didn't have to worry too much about some outside group coming in to change things. Because there, most people are trying to get away from Mugabe and his dictatorship. People are not rushing to come into Zimbabwe. But for me, it was a very eye-opening experience. I've never been in a place where everybody looks like me. And in fact, they expected me to speak either Swahili, Bantu, or Zulu. Those are the three languages of many, but those are the three. If you can speak those three, you can communicate with just about anybody if you can speak one of those three. That's part of my history. So what's my future? I have lots of kids who tell me they don't have one. They have no hope. I just got back from Seattle at the Science of Hope conference. If you haven't been there, you might want to check it out. It's every year in Seattle. It's a phenomenal conference. They do a think tank on the first day of people from all over the world that work with trauma. I think, Becky, you may have been to it. If you haven't, I know you've been to the conference. I don't know if you've been to the think tank. And if you haven't, you should probably go and participate in that. It's a phenomenal experience. This was my third trip out, and I absolutely love being able to go. But what is the future? What do you see as the future? What's my story about being challenged for the future? What are my values? Back to that whole piece of developing values. How do my values fit into this? What are the practices that I need to be doing? I told you one of mine is to ask myself a question. Why am I responding the way that I am? When the hair on the back of my neck stands up, I ask myself, why is that happening? If I don't respond, I ask myself, why did I not respond? What's going on with me? Because I cannot control what's going on with everyone else. And finally, knowledge. How do I know that all of these things are true? How do I know what I know? Remember the butter knife? How do I know it's a butter knife? How do I know it's not a screwdriver? So how do I know what I know? And how do I verify that, in fact, it's true? Understanding how we work in those 6 dimensions is what we talk about as being worldview intelligence or worldview intelligent. And it offers a way to avoid the collisions of worldviews, and instead we come together in ways that build understanding and respect. Now, I spoke a little earlier about practice. Understand that we have a multiplicity of worldviews, not just an individual one. We have a cultural worldview. Our organizations and teams have them. Our professionals have them. And even society has a worldview. And you can, I mean, if you stop and think about this, I told you I live in North Minneapolis. You think about the police community relations. Individuals have a worldview about what that is. And the police culture, which is the profession, and the African-American population cultural, have very differing views. As do society, as voiced just not too long ago in our state legislature saying, protesting, no, we're not going to allow it. You can't shut down a freeway. When in fact, protesting and shutting down roads has been one of the best ways of doing anything. And yet now society says those things are all wrong because it inconveniences people. What do they think happens when you traumatize an entire community? I have an entire community in North Minneapolis where a tornado went through. Most worldview situations, when we see in a school where there's a mass shooting, we send in all types of resources, but we never send anybody into the community to deal with that, not recognizing that the trauma is not just about the school. The whole community gets traumatized. It becomes collective. And so the question is, how do we begin to deal with that? But there are all these different things. And so there are multiple ways that you can slice and dice this, right? But let's not get too deep. The last little piece that I want to talk to you about is this one, the law of group polarization. I just want to talk about this. When we're around people who are like us, we become more extreme in our views. So if our worldviews, and like I said, I'm different presenting to you now than I am when I'm playing with my granddaughter. I mean, we were just doing I'm a Little Teapot before I came here. And yes, I'm doing all the little and falling on the floor and we're having a blast. She's 2 years old. But that's different than when I'm here. If our worldviews are so influential upon how we see the world around us and how we act in that world, how can we be more clear? How do we know more clearly what our worldviews are? Because eventually they will get in the way. I was going to have you do a little bit more of a reflection, but I want to go back because I brought up some pictures, right? So here was the first one. And I want you to think a little bit about what you thought might be happening here. And so I want you to take a moment to think back when I ask you to think about what you thought was happening here. And then I want you, how you might see it differently when you know that this is a photo of we don't all learn in the same way. When I host dialogues in the community, I have flip chart paper and markers and kinetic sand and all types of toys on the table for people to, and ink pens and I mean, I got slinkies and every toy known to humankind, it feels like, because I got a big duffel bag full of them, all on the table for people because I don't know how they're going to learn. Some people I'll see sitting and they'll be on their cell phones. And I've heard people say, well, they're not paying any attention. Actually, they're probably paying more attention than we thought. And that we have to let go of our preconceived, our worldviews about what learning looks like. When I spoke with the medical folks on Tuesday, we talked about the impressions that physicians had of their patients. And one of the things that we talked about in that was when the perception is that people don't care about their health because they stop coming or they don't do like the doctor says. And I started to question this idea of 15 minutes for a doctor's visit. And people became very vocal with the fact that that's all the time we can spend and we have to make sure that we get everything done if we're going to make an appropriate diagnosis. And I said, yes, and I understand that. And I said, but what if what you're trying to diagnose isn't the real reason why they're there? And they looked at me and they said, what do you mean? I said, I can come and present with a migraine headache, and you can give me something for the symptoms of a migraine headache. But if you don't deal with the root cause, tomorrow I'll have another migraine headache, and the day after, and the day after. And eventually I get to a point where I will stop coming to see you because I don't believe in what you're talking about. It's very important, as I explained to them. I said, you have 15 minutes as the doctor. The nurse has 15 minutes. And God knows how long the waiting room has. If you are truly a care team, isn't there a way for you to take that 45 minutes, let's say, and learn more about why a person, who a person really is, and to begin to hear their story, and to understand that the first rule of listening, when we ask a person a question, the first rule of listening is to stop talking. That in fact, when we ask the next question, we have now hijacked their story. Just like the amygdala gets hijacked, we take that story in the direction that we want it to go rather than the story that they want to tell. Yesterday when I put this up the first time, people just became dead silent. And we had this conversation. The women's hockey team from Edmonton, Canada, 1916. If we know our history, we know that that symbol was actually a symbol of peace long before it was appropriated by some other group and made into what we have had burned into our psyche to never forget. I don't know. Does anyone out there, can you tell me who that guy is on the right? Can you type an answer in for me? I'll give you a couple of seconds here to look at that. Can you tell me who that is on the right? Becky, do you know who it is?
Only because you told me yesterday.
Don't you
So that
answer.
doesn't
Don't
count.
you dare.
Oh, we have a hand. Hang on, we've got a hand.
Okay,
Darlene Miller has her hand up. Or Darlene
Please.
Miller. Let me see if Darlene, I have opened up your mic so you can speak. What's your answer?
Is it Nick Nolte?
that's a very good guess. It is not, but you are right on track, okay? And so anyone else want to hazard a guess out there? Not hearing anything,
I don't
Becky.
see any others. I don't see any others yet. Thank you, Darlene.
Here's your
so
answer.
awesome to hear other voices.
Yes, I'm telling you, every night, just thank you for that. Here you go. Our whole perception of who that guy is changes.
Oh, we did have
When
a
we know
guest.
it's Richard.
I did have a guest that came in right after you put it up, but the guest was Brett Favre from Dex. Guest Brett Favre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how we can look at this, and at first it looks like the guy's eating out of a garbage can. And in this movie, Richard Gere is never going to eat out of a garbage can, right? But that's the impression that they give us. And so we don't even consider that that's who it could be. This young man here, and this was the thing with Land O'Lakes. God, we have a prison in Land O'Lakes, right? And so know that I am a retired state employee. I spent over 25 years working at the State Department of Corrections. I've worked in every state prison that we have, adult, juvenile, male, female. And so sometimes I get things twisted about Lino Lakes and Land O'Lakes. Because Land O'Lakes had a big office up there too, which really screwed up my thinking. But this guy is the CEO at EG Enterprise, which is a professional training and coaching thing that started with e-commerce, e-commerce-based business as a way to develop human relations skills. And so it turned into a global thing. So Edgar Gonzalez is the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And so, yeah, there's just all kinds of pieces. And so here was that slide I showed you, the view of the world, right? And the really question is, which way is right? The one on the left or the one on the right? And it really does talk about our worldview and how we see things in the world. So as you think about this thing called worldview, the invitation here is to stay curious. The invitation is to constantly recognize that there is a multiplicity of worldviews out there, and that if we truly want to engage around this thing that we call diversity, and we want to engage with people who are very different from us, recognizing that our trauma plays a role in this, and our ability to traumatize other people because of our worldview plays into this. But as we think about this, that multiplicity of worldviews and diversity is not about sameness, and it's not about difference. Diversity is about the conflict that happens when you bring people who are very different into a space and ask them to just get along. You are opening yourself up to some grand possibilities if we can have the conversation on a worldview level that, yes, you see the world differently than I do. This is why I see it the way I do. Help me understand how you see it that way. What are the things that influence you to help you get to that? And then that search through reality, through history, through future, values, practice, and knowledge. Always knowledge. How do we verify this? Because I've been in a situation where I thought my worldview was right, and just to be slapped upside the head with sitting talking to someone and hearing their story and realizing just how wrong my view of the world was. And maybe sometimes the world is upside down, and that we really do have to step back and consider, what are the lenses through which you will view the world around you? My piece for you is that you now have new information.
So
And
Dave,
in the way
I'll let
yes.
you finish. Sorry, we do have a couple questions when you're ready for them.
I was just going to say, and let's just go to the questions. It isn't important what I was getting. It is important, but I'll come back to it. Go ahead.
Okay, I thought there was a pause and I was trying to catch it. So first of all, another appreciation from Jackie. She says, I'm so thankful at this moment to have been able to attend this webinar. It's very helpful for my life, especially as I'm raising a Black female in the world today. She's reaching adulthood by age only in a few weeks. I have some words to share with her as she goes out into the wild, in quotes, this world of ours. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love to each of you. And then she also says this webinar will also influence an upcoming community cafe being done at my job at Job Corps. And
Thank you.
then Kelsey has a question. She says, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I never would have guessed you were uncomfortable using technology. I'm a public health nurse and I visit new moms and babies in the community. How can I listen to hear and not to react to these moms when they share behaviors regarding safety, substance abuse while pregnant, bed sharing, vaccinations, etc.? Sometimes they only let us come into their home one time.
Yeah. You know, first, the first piece, thank you very much. And if there's ever anything I can do to help with a cafe, let me know. And my contact information is there. Home visiting. You have a soft spot in my heart. I look at home visiting as one of those evidence-based practices that I know works, because you go in and you build relationships, or at least that's the foundation of what you tried to do. Please keep in mind, and you know, I was kind of taken aback. I think it was Richfield who just voted to raise the smoking age to 21, and everyone is applauding. And I keep asking folks, when was the last time passing some legislation stopped someone from smoking? And this is the issue I have with the medical profession. We keep trying to diagnose symptoms. Smoking is nothing more than a symptom of a problem that sits there. People smoke because the chemicals in the smoke itself reduce the stress. And when you can't get relief anywhere else, you turn to something. those folks have turned to smoking. And to try to condemn them and shame them into putting the cigarettes down will never work. The only way you're going to do that is begin to understand why they smoke. What's going on in their life? And this is why I said for doctors, they need to use the entire 45 minutes. Because I walk into a doctor's office and the doctor says to me, well, your problem is you're overweight. You need to lose weight. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't know I weigh 376 pounds and that is a detriment to my health? And that I have tried, that I spend 5 classes a week in an aqua Zumba class? Now, if you do Zumba on the deck, try doing it in the water with weights. So there are all these things. Understand about asking the whys and understanding the whys in all of this. Help me understand who you really are. Don't begin with trying to take away all those things. They're there for a reason. When we train foster parents, one of the things we tell them is don't try to change a child's language. If a child is sexually active, you're telling them that that's the worst thing they could do is not going to work with them. The question is, are you safe if you're sexually active? Because you know what? They're not going to stay with you forever. They're going back somewhere. Whether they leave you, the woman who was raising the young African-American girl, she's going out into the real world. And the question, if she was sexually active, wouldn't be, that's not good for you. Because as soon as you tell her that, she's going to go do it even more. The real question is, are you safe? Are you practicing safe sex? Are you doing what you need to do? If you want to become pregnant, that's one thing. But if you don't, what are you doing to prevent it? Right? And not get tied up in the values and the judgment of what's right and what's wrong. I got 2 minutes left here, Becky. I use this thing around caning, and I had this conversation about discipline. And I said, let's take an extreme of caning. And I said, in some countries, caning is against the law, like here. In the Philippines, it's not. And then and everybody is looking at me, yeah, but it's morally wrong. I said, but it's legal in the Philippines. And so when you go to the Philippines, you better be damn well ready that if you do something really wrong, you could end up getting caned. Then I found out just recently that they were using caning in the state of Texas. This is just brought to me at the medical conference I was at on Tuesday, that there is caning going on in the public school system in Texas, which I found absolutely abhorrent because I thought we had outlawed that here, right? So stay away from all those judgment things. I talked about living in the direction of our language. I am removing the words good, bad, pretty, ugly, the word but. Because as soon as you say the word but, everybody forgets everything that was in front of it because they want to know what you're getting ready to say to tear them down. Because usually we put the good stuff in front and then we say but, and they forget all that and they just hear the other thing. So what are the judgment pieces that I can take out of any conversation that I have? We were going to show you a video, but we can't. And come Monday, it will be available for anyone to use. And what I will do with Becky is I will give her the link so that if you want to go back in and take a look at it, you can. And it gets into mental models and how mental models work. Okay, so I train foster parents. I have 5 adult children, 17 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. I am retired. I will start drawing Social Security here very shortly, which tells you that I'm approaching 66 years of age. Thank you very much for giving me space and place in your world today. If there's ever anything I can do, reach out to Becky. I think you probably at the end you'll find my contact information. There I am. And so reach out. I love talking with people. I love hearing the stories. I will simply say Sawubona, and we'll talk again soon.
Sawubona, Dave. Thank you very much. You all will get an email follow-up probably today that has a link to an evaluation. Please take a few short moments to fill it out. We are always eager for your feedback. And thanks again, Dave. We really appreciate it. Hopefully this has been a taste of something that you'll all want to explore further. And thanks for being with us today. And with that, we will say goodbye.